Now, a group of MPs say transgender people should no longer have to live in their acquired gender for 2 years before getting legal recognition. The Women and Equalities Committee, led by Tory MP Caroline Noakes, also say that transgender people shouldn't need a doctor's sign-off for gender dysphoria to be recognised. But some women's rights campaigners argue this move could jeopardise single-sex spaces. Well, shall we find out why? I'm joined by Dr. Nicola Williams, who's a spokesperson for Fair Play for Women, and she also gave evidence to the committee. Nicola, should it be down to doctors or self-declaration to legally establish someone's gender? I mean, what's wrong with someone saying, I'm a woman, I believe I'm a woman, or alternatively, I believe I'm a man, without having a doctor diagnosing it, without having to live 2 years as someone of the opposite sex to the one they were born with?
So let me set out then exactly what the proposals are, because I think then viewers can make their minds up whether this is outdated or whether the MPs are being sensible here. So the Gender Recognition Act is the law that allows people to change the sex that's written on their birth certificate and to hide the fact that it was changed. Now, birth certificates are important legal documents, and I don't think it's unreasonable that there should be some checks and balances there. One of those checks is that someone has at least lived as trans for a period of time and has a doctor's diagnosis of gender dysphoria. No need to have surgery, no need to have any medication, but simply a diagnosis of gender dysphoria. So what MPs want is to wipe away that process and to have an on-demand system. So that would mean any man, for any reason, would be able to change his birth certificate to say that he had been born female and that it would be a criminal offence for anyone to reveal that that man hadn't been born male at all. So, is that something that trans people should have the right to do? No one else has the right to change their birth certificate. And we need to know people's birth sex in society. It matters, and it matters a lot to women and girls, because we have laws to protect women and girls, to give us single-sex spaces, and this is based on people's birth sex. So it's a space for people who were born female, and we can say no to anyone who was born male. Now, that system simply doesn't work if there's another law that comes in that allows male people to hide the fact that they're male. So there's an obvious clash, and that's why we oppose it, because these two laws just don't work together. And so we have to make sure that there's something that works for everyone. And having the diagnosis of gender dysphoria is one simple check that we're asking trans people to have. And that's why we oppose these ideas from these MPs.
But why is there such a push and such a clamour all of a sudden for gender self-ID? And then whenever anybody like you speaks up about this and gives evidence and says, well, it's quite obvious, we can't have a scenario where any old Tom, Dick or Harry can suggest that they're Deborah, Marjorie or Valerie, that all of a sudden you're called a transphobe. Why is there all of a sudden this urgency to push through something as sensitive as gender self-ID?
I think we have to distinguish here between trans rights and trans demands. Now, I support trans rights. Trans rights are things like the right for a trans person not to be discriminated against at work, or it's the right for a trans person to be safe when they walk down the street. So that's why we have hate crime laws to protect trans people. And it's the right for trans people to have access to good healthcare, for example. These are trans rights, and trans people should not have to go through checks and balances to get those rights. All of those rights are already based on self-ID. So any person who thinks they're trans can say they're trans and have all those rights. I think that's good. But what we're talking about here with birth certificates is that it's for a trans person to be able to say not that they're trans, that they were literally born the opposite sex. So for someone who was born male to say they are literally female, that they were born female the same as you and I. Now that is a step too far. That is a demand too far because it impacts other people. And that's why we have to say, no, actually this is too much. We need the system that works for everyone. You can't simply change a birth certificate without some controls. And calling us transphobic for objecting to that is ridiculous. We are simply saying, no, women are affected. We have a view on this and we need to be heard too.